Hi and welcome to this video on Adobe Camera RAW. Adobe Camera RAW is a software that comes free along with Photoshop. Here are some images that are processed in Camera RAW. You can compare it with the original and see how powerful this software is. Photoshop cannot process RAW files by itself, therefore it has to use a converter like Adobe Camera RAW to convert RAW files into a format by which it is able to process that file. RAW files are minimally processed images that contain unprocessed data from the camera sensor. They are similar to negatives from film with more control over the image creation process. Various camera manufacturers have different formats of RAW images and they are listed on the screen for your reference. Normally you would shoot in either JPEG or TIFF format or in RAW format. TIFF and JPEG are processed formats, whereas RAW is unprocessed data that is gathered from the camera sensor. RAW files are therefore larger than JPEG files because they contain more data, or contain all the data rather. JPEG files are created from the sensor data after it is processed and after all the extra information is deleted from it and compressed. Therefore, a JPEG file may be about 10% of the size of the actual RAW file. However, a RAW file is better because it contains more information and therefore you can leverage that information to process your picture better. Generally, a RAW file is opened up in Camera RAW. After being processed in Camera RAW, it is then sent to Photoshop for further processing. So here's the difference between a processed JPEG file and a processed RAW file. The highlights and the shadows are much better in the RAW image. So a RAW file is opened up in Camera RAW where you may want to make some adjustments or modifications to the image, as in exposure, contrast, saturation, etc. You may want to apply filters and masks to this image to separate areas of the image, and then you may want to save this image either into a JPEG, TIFF or a DNG format. A DNG is a RAW format from Adobe, and thereafter you may want to process it in Photoshop. Camera RAW creates additional files. For example, if your Camera RAW file is called photo1.raw, for example, the modifications would be stored in a similar name. So for example, it would be called photo1.xmp, which contains the adjustments and modifications to the file that you made in Camera RAW. And any filters or masks that you may have applied will be saved in another file with the same name, for example, photo1.acr. This is because we cannot modify the RAW file. The RAW file stays as it is, but the modifications that you make are stored in separate images, and the combination of the RAW file and the modifications further gives you the process file. So how do you open up your RAW file in Camera RAW? There are two ways. One is using your file explorer, either in Windows or the Mac. In Windows, you would typically use Windows Explorer, or on the Mac, you would use something like Finder. So from any one of these file managers, you can open up your image in Photoshop. Since Photoshop cannot work directly with RAW files, it will send the RAW file to Camera RAW. Then from Camera RAW, you can further open it up in Photoshop back again to continue processing the image. The other way to open up a RAW file is in Adobe Bridge. Adobe Bridge is a photo management software where it allows you to rate, label photos, make collections, etc. So it's a good photo manager. And it also has the convenience of launching various features of Photoshop from within Bridge itself. So if you open up your RAW file from Bridge itself, it will directly open in Camera RAW, and from Camera RAW then you can take it further into Photoshop. If you would like to work with the original images in this video, you can download them from the link that is in the description of this video. This video has been broken up into chapters which you will find in the description of this video. So as discussed earlier, you can either open up your RAW file in your file manager, that is either Windows Explorer or Finder on the Mac. So you simply right click on it and you say open with Photoshop. Photoshop itself will automatically open up the file in Camera RAW. I'm going to cancel this right now, and I'm going to show you the other way in which you can open up a file in Camera RAW. This is Adobe Bridge, and you can open up your photo from within Adobe Bridge. So this is my RAW file, it's an NEF file. So I'm going to right click on it and choose open in Camera RAW. So Camera RAW, basically this is your screen, and you have on the top the name of the file and the camera used to click the photo. On the right side you have a convert and save image option, a box with an arrow on it. So when you click on that, it will allow you to save this file out into either one of these formats: TIFF, JPEG, PSD, DNG, etc. I'm going to choose JPEG for the moment, and I'm going to choose the highest quality, that is 12. Okay, and the color space we are going to use is sRGB. Now sRGB is the most commonly used color space because it's available across all devices, on the internet, at home, everywhere. If you want to use a higher quality or a higher color space, then you may want to use something like Apple RGB or Adobe RGB or Pro Photo RGB. But for the moment we are going to use sRGB because it's common across all platforms. Okay, so when you click save, your particular photo will be saved in the same folder if you choose to. Otherwise you can choose a new location to save your file. Okay, so I'm going to say save in same location, and I'm going to keep those settings as is. So when you click save, it will create a JPEG file for you because that's what we have specified here. So the moment I'm going to cancel, and the next thing there is the preferences for Camera RAW. So you may want to keep all that as is, and the workflow options there is what we just set to color space sRGB 8 bits per channel and so on. So you can leave the rest as it is for the moment and click OK. The last option there is a toggle icon where you can click on it so that you can use it as part of the screen and not full screen, and so that will let you go back and forth to the software and any other application that you may want to use. So I'm going to go back to full screen, and on your left hand side here or at the bottom, okay, so for example if you right click on this film strip which contains all the photos that you've opened. In our case we have just opened one photo, so you can either choose it as vertical or horizontal. So if I choose horizontal, it will come down here, okay, or if you choose vertical, go back there. I prefer vertical because you get more space to look at your picture. Now this, on the bottom here you have the percentage of display of the photo. So right now it is showing at 67%, and the zoom that you desire is here. So if you can say zoom to 100%, that means now when you click here it will go to 100% zoom. If you want it larger, you can set it larger here. So I can set 200%. So the next time you click on that plus button, it will go to 200% instead of 100%. Okay. This here is to show or hide the film strip. The next button is to sort. So if you want to sort on the basis of rating, file name, color. So if you have opened multiple photos to process, you may want to sort them or filter them so that you can see only part of them for the moment, and then you can sort them according to rating, color label, or show marked or unmarked photos, etc. The rating and labels are shown here in the middle. So for example, this photo is not rated, but if I wanted to rate it, I could just click on it and it would get rated. And if I wanted to give it a color, I could set a label to maybe yellow, that is work in progress. Then you have a delete button. So if you want to delete this image amongst many, then you can mark it for deletion so that when you click done, the file will be deleted for you automatically. And finally, and here at the bottom, you have two icons. One's to show before and after the processing Okay, so for example, this cycles between before and after views. So right now we don't have any processing done, so it's going to show us the same thing. On the right hand side, you have, on the rightmost side, you have a single panel which has buttons for each of the panels. So for example, you have the edit panel, the crop panel, you have the remove panel, the masking panel, the red eye panel, you have the presets panel, you have the snapshots panel, and you have the presets panel. Finally, you have three dots here, which gives you a menu for various other things that you can do in this panel here. Now, if you click on the edit panel, that's the first one. The shortcut is E. The shortcut for the crop panel is C. The next one is B. The masking one is M. Then you have the red eye button, that is Shift E. Then you have the snapshot button, which is Shift S, and you have the presets button, which is Shift P. Now, when you click on the edit panel button, you have a list of panels, a sub panel, which opens up, and the top of which you find the histogram. So just below the histogram, you'll find the word edit, and you have auto mode, you have black and white, and you have HDR mode. Okay, then you have various sub panels like light, color, effects, curves, color mixer, color grading, detail, optics, blends, blur, and calibration. At the bottom, you have the zoom tool, you have the hand tool if you want. So when you are zoomed in, for example, and you want to move the picture around, you can use the hand tool to move it around. Alternatively, you can press the space bar whilst dragging the mouse, and you'll be able to move to see various sections of the image. Then you have at the bottom, you have a toggle sample overlay tool. And finally, you have the grid. So if you put the grid on, then you can have a grid to show various aspects of the image if you want to see if things are aligned and stuff like that. So you can have that. And right now I want to go to full screen view. So I'm going to press Command 0 or Control 0, and this will show me the entire image. Now, if you go to grid mode right here, you can choose the size of the grid on top here. You can choose the opacity of the grid, how much of it you want to show. And accordingly, as you can see now, horizon is aligned, so the picture is straight. I'm going to put it off. So when you are processing images, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is you have to make sure that you remove the distortions that come from the lens that you're using. So if we go to the optics panel, the optics sub panel in the edit panel, and you'll find two options there, two tabs. One is manual and one is profile. So in the profile tab, you will find remove chromatic aberrations and use profile corrections. Profile corrections are used to remove barrel and pincushion distortions in photographs. So if I click on the use profile corrections options, you will find here that the picture has changed. As you can see, when you put it on, now it's looking a little flatter, and I don't like this look, so I'm going to put this use profile corrections on because this looks better. And if you zoom into a place where you have a high contrast area, so for example, I'm going to put this hand tool off and I'm just going to zoom in, you can see there is chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is the discoloration that you see around areas that have high contrast, like very bright and very dark. And this happens because of the lens. So if you put remove chromatic aberrations on, you'll see that it has been reduced to quite an extent. And if you further want to reduce it, you can further just move up this purple slider, and you see that it has gone almost. Okay, so if there's a green fringing, you can use the green to remove it. So that takes care of these corrections which need to be done on the basis of the lens that you have been using. Another problem with processing images is the noise factor. So if you zoom in, you'll see this, that there is a lot of noise in the image. So if I go to the details panel, that's where you can do the adjustments for the noise, and I put everything to 0, you'll see that there is a lot of noise. There is a color noise and there is luminescence noise. Luminescence noise is just black and white dots, whereas color noise is color dots that you will see. So for example, if you look closely now at this area, so if you look closely to this area, you'll see that there are some color dots in this area. So if I move under the detail panel, if I move this color slider, notice now that they have disappeared from here. So we no longer have those color dots which were there earlier. So if I bring in the color slider back, you can see they reappear. Okay, so I'm going to keep it somewhere at 25, which is good enough. And so that's how we take care of the color noise. The luminance noise is basically taken care of by moving the luminance slider ahead. So as you can see now, it's much less. So if I bring it back to 0, you can see the noise has appeared again. So I'm going to push it up to a point where it smoothens out a bit. Okay, so this is one way. And if you want to further look at details and contrast, so if you're not seeing all these sliders, it is because this arrow is pointing left, which means that those options are closed. So open up those options by clicking on that arrow there. So it's pointing down. That means those options are available. Now this is one way, the old way of taking care of noise reduction. But with the newer versions of Camera Raw, they've also given you a feature called denoise. So if you click on that button, denoise, then it will attempt to remove the noise from the picture. Now this is a long process. It's going to take a long time, but it does a very good job. So I'm going to put this video on hold till it is done, and we'll continue from there on. Okay, so it has done the denoising. So as you can see now, the picture looks much clearer. And if you look at before after, and if you zoom in, you see the big difference in the left and the right hand side. It has removed a lot of noise and it looks much better. So if you click on this button again and choose single view, you'll come back to single view. A shortcut to get back to single view, in case you are in one of these views here and you want to get back to single view, you can simply click on the crop panel here and then click on the edit panel. It will get to single view. The shortcut for that is CE. So for example, if we are here, I simply press C and E and we are back to single view. So now we have looked at optics and we have looked at details. The next thing we need to look at is the alignment of the image, whether it is looking straight or not. So for that we need to go to the crop panel, and in the crop panel what we need to do is simply click on the auto button to see what it does. So as you can see, it has adjusted the distortions and it's tried to straighten the picture, but I don't want that because a lot of the left side is getting cut. So I'm going to click on the off button, so no geometry adjustments. And in my opinion, I think it looks straight. Everything looks fine. The horizon is also fine. So we don't need to do any much cropping here. So I'm going to go out of the crop options. If you want to manually do anything with this picture, you can. For example, if you right click and say constraint aspect ratio off, okay, it's currently on. So if you click on it, it will go off. So now you will be able to change this image to any size you want, length, breadth wise, whatever. Okay, so if you right click and say reset to full, it will go back to normal. And if you want to keep the same aspect ratio, now the aspect ratio is the ratio between the height and the width of the image. So if you want to keep it the same, you can put constrained aspect ratio on. So it's on right now. So when you try to resize, notice that it maintains the aspect, okay, either vertically or horizontally. And if you right click, you further have presets where you can have various kind of ratios like 2:3, 5:7, 8.5 by 11, 1:1, which is square, 16:9, which is your HD TV format, etc. So you have various options here from which you can choose. So for example, if I wanted an HD option, I could choose 16:9, and this would give me a similar aspect ratio as that of your TV or monitor. So I'm going to reset to full. I don't want to do any cropping here. Now if you want to manually make changes to this image, there are various options in the crop and expand panel. So the first thing is enable expand. Okay. So in this option you have preset where you have full and various other presets depending on what you want to choose, and there is also generative expand. Okay. So for example, now if I want to extend this picture slightly to the left, I could drag to the left, and notice that it is maintaining the ratio. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z, and I'm going to put constraint aspect ratio off. So now I can just take it to the left a little, and now the generative expand option has been activated. So when I click generate, Camera Raw is going to try to use AI to fill in that, and as you can see, it's done it beautifully. There is a slight shading problem there which you can correct in Photoshop, or you can attempt to even try to correct it here using the remove panel. So there are three options here that it's given you. This is variation 1. So if I click on that small arrow there, this is variation 2 and variation 3. Doesn't seem to be much change. Okay, that's 2, that's 1. So I think 1 is good. We'll keep 1. So we say keep. Okay. So we've added to this image here, and that's using the enable expand and generative expand. Okay. So depending on what you want to do with the image, you can also flip it horizontally, okay, or vertically if it was an upside down picture. Now you can make geometry adjustments. For example, we saw earlier that we could use auto, but you could also say make the horizontal line straight. So that's what it did here. It attempted to do that here, or keep all the vertical lines straight, or keep both horizontal and vertical lines straight. So now notice that it has changed the image. In order to do that, we don't want that. So I'm going to click cancel or off. And the last option there allows you to draw lines to show which areas should be straight. So for example, I'm drawing a line here, and I'm drawing another parallel line here. So it will use that as a guide to straighten the image. Also, I can also do it for vertical lines. For example, I can say these two should be horizontal, should be straight horizontally. So I made a mistake there to pull that up there. So now it is making those lines straight accordingly in the picture and adjusting the rest of the picture accordingly. I don't want that, so I'm going to say clear guide and go back to off. Now the distortions in your image can be corrected with these sliders here called manual transformation. So you have vertical, horizontal. You can rotate the image as you need. You can scale it. You can push it to the left or right in case you have any cropping option. For example, if I choose a preset of 3:4 or 2:3, now there is a certain image, part of the image which is on the side. So I can move it left or right with the offset option into the crop frame. Similarly, I can move it up and down with the Y option. Okay, so I'm going to undo all that. I don't want any of these geometry things to apply. So I'll go and reset each of these sliders back to normal. Okay. or I could just go and do a reset completely on the image right on top there. Okay, so these are the various options that you have in the crop and expand, which are quite useful, especially if you want to generate some more area into your picture. Now the next thing you need to do is you have to look at your histogram, because the histogram tells you about your image. So if you move your cursor from left to right, just move your cursor over your mouse cursor over the histogram, and you'll see that it shows you various sections. So the leftmost section is called black, followed by shadows, followed by exposure, followed by highlights, and followed by whites. So whites means extreme bright areas, blacks means extreme dark areas, dark, just mildly dark areas are called shadows, and mildly bright areas are called highlights, and the middle range is called exposure, or what we call midtones. If you look at this histogram, it shows the distribution of data. Okay, so everything, as you can see, is on the left hand side. That means everything is dark, and there is only a small spike there on the extreme right hand side, showing that there are very bright areas, but they are very less compared to the rest of the image. As you can see, these very bright lights are what it's referring to all over the place here. So in order to correct the histogram, or to correct the image, now this was shot just after sunset, so more or less this is what it looked like. But if you want to brighten up a bit, you can add a little bit of exposure. And as you can see, as you keep adding exposure, it will keep brightening up the image and it looks much better. But I don't want it so bright, so I'm going to just take it up to one stop, +1. So that looks good enough. And look at the histogram now. It has changed because we've added a lot of mid-tone and it has brightened up the image. That was simply using one slider. Now contrast is when you want to add light to the brighter areas and you want to remove light from the darker areas. So that means you want to make the darks darker and the brights brighter. So that is done with the contrast slider. So when you move it to the right, it increases the whites and increases the blacks. So as you can see, this is what it gets to. On the other hand, if you move it to the left, it decreases the whites and it decreases the blacks. So you will come to a grayish picture. So if you double click on any one of these sliders, it will go back to its original position, in this case 0. So we are not adding any contrast. So remember that contrast adds or removes light simultaneously from both blacks and whites. That means extremely dark areas and extremely bright areas. If you want to deal with semi-bright areas or semi-dark areas, then you have highlights, which deals with semi-bright areas. So for example, let's say I want to reduce the amount of brightness in this light here. So I will reduce the highlights. As you can see now, I can see little more detail in the highlights because I have reduced it. Similarly, if I want to see more detail in the shadows, for example, these trees here, there are shadows here, and I want to see some detail there, I could bring up the shadows, and now, as you can see, there is more detail in the trees because I brought up the highlights, and notice that the histogram also has changed accordingly. So this looks a little better with a little detail here and there, but if you still want to modify it, okay, now contrast, as I said earlier, does black and white simultaneously, but if you want to use them separately, then you may want to adjust black and white by using these two sliders called whites and blacks. So if I zoom in close to this light and I bring down the whites, as you can see, now you can actually see the bulb inside, which you could not do earlier. So there's more detail now by reducing the white. But remember that all these settings in the edit panel are global settings. Global settings means that whatever settings you apply will apply to the entire image. Okay, so wherever there are whites in the image, it will apply to them. So in this case, it's good because we don't want them to show too bright. So that's fine. Now the black areas, for example, if I bring down the blacks, you see that it becomes a little more contrasty. becomes a little more clearer. Okay, it doesn't look hazy. So you can use the black slider to bring down or make it a little more clearer. So this is fine now, looking nice and balanced. And this is what we've done using the light sub panel, which is found in the edit panel. Now when dealing with the light sub panel here, all these settings that you see, exposure, contrast, highlights, etc., can also be done here in the histogram itself. So for example, if you place your pointer in the middle, it will show you as exposure. So dragging to the left is as good as moving the exposure slider to the left, and dragging to the right is as good as moving the exposure slider to the right. So notice now, by doing that on the histogram itself, I am able to move the exposure way past 1, and you can see it is like a very nicely lit picture. Okay, so I'm going to double click on this button, on this triangle here, on this slider, so it goes back to 0. Okay. And I'm going to type, you can also type in a value here, so I'm going to type in 1, so that's the setting I want. Similarly, you can reduce highlights by dragging on that area in the histogram. Notice my mouse pointer is in the histogram area, and that is the area that is being manipulated. Similarly, you can manipulate shadows in the image, okay, and so on. So blacks and whites are the same, so this is blacks and this is whites. Okay, so I'm going to press Ctrl Z to go back to my original setting. Okay, so if you're not sure, you can simply double click on each of these and these triangles here, and you can reset your picture to what it was. Okay, so I'm going to reduce this to what it was earlier. So this is about the look that I'm going for right now. Okay. Now there's one more thing that you need to know from these sliders, where you have an alternative view. So for example, now when I'm doing this to the exposure slider, it's adding or removing light from the image. But I don't know by doing this whether I'm blowing out my highlights, or by reducing the blacks whether I'm making it totally black and not just dark. So you have two options here. This is called a shadow clipping warning. So if I put it on, if you've gone and made something very dark, it will show up in blue. So for example, now I will bring up the exposure, and as I keep bringing up the exposure, you notice that those blue areas disappear. So this shows that there is no very dark area, and the dark areas have some detail. Similarly, you have a highlight clipping option, where if you click on that there, you get a white box coming showing that that option is on. So now if I increase the brightness, notice that you'll have red spots appearing in areas that are too bright. Those are warnings, so that you may know that you need not go beyond that point. So I'm going to put those off for the moment, and I'm going to show you one more way in which you can gauge this. So whilst dragging, for example, the exposure slider, if you press the Option or Alt button, then as you move the sliders, you'll notice that there will be areas, like for example, if I make it very bright, you'll see there are red areas appearing. So if I move it to the left until all the red areas depart or are not there, that would be an ideal setting with regard to the highlights. Okay. So you can use that alternative view to also look at what you're processing. Okay. This works with other sliders as well, and you can check that out in your processing. So whilst processing your image, the most important thing to look at in the edit panel, there is a profile which currently says Adobe Color. So if you open up that box, you will see there is Adobe Landscape, Portrait, etc. So depending on the type of image you have, you may want to just simply click on that uh, profile, and it would give you, and it would interpret this, raw image accordingly for its colors and processing. So for example, if I choose this as a landscape image, okay, it will treat this image in a different way than it would if I chose Adobe Color. Notice the change now when I click Adobe Color, and notice when I choose landscape. See, there is a difference in the way it interprets the color. Okay, so if you're not sure, simply use Adobe Color and move ahead. Now the next sub panel is color, and in this sub panel you may want to use it to adjust your white balance, the temperature of the image, the tint, the vibrance, and the saturation. Now in this image, you note that this picture was shot just after sunset, where the blue hour was setting in. Therefore, there will be a kind of blue cast in this image. And if you wanted to remove that cast, and you knew that there were certain areas which are gray in your, it could be light gray or dark gray in your image, then you could simply use this eyedropper here and click on that image, on that part of the image which you probably know is gray. I'm assuming that this cloud, this part of the cloud here is a lighter shade of gray, and I'm going to click on it. And just like that, you notice that it has changed the feel of this picture, assuming that that point was gray. Now, digitally speaking, in color, if the colors made of red, green, and blue, and if these values are equal, that is, the value of red, green, and blue is equal, then you would know that the value we are looking at is a gray shade. So for example, I'm not moving my mouse now, I'm keeping it where I clicked earlier. And if you look at the histogram there, it says R102, G102, and B102 or 103, which is very close. So it is now automatically adjusted that point to become a gray point, and on the basis of that adjusted the rest of the picture to match it. In other words, we have changed the temperature or the white balance of this image. Okay. Now if I do something wrong, like for example I click on a part of the blue sky and say that this is gray, notice that it creates a much different kind of effect. So if I click on the green grass, notice it changes again. So be careful when you're using this dropper tool, the white balance dropper tool. So this will help you to get the right white balance, but you must click on some gray area in the picture that will help you to get the color right. So with respect to the time of day and the lighting in the scene, this looks quite about what it was when we shot it. You want to increase the colors in the image subtly, you can use the vibrance slider. So this will add more color to the image without overpowering the already colorful areas. But if you move the saturation slider, it will add color to every part of the image irrespective of whether it is saturated or not. So it is like a big hammer. Okay, you can see. So what we normally do is we add a little bit of vibrance, say up to 25, and if we feel that you need a little more color, just add a dash of saturation. So that will get the image to the right color. The next, so again in this case, you see that you have various options here, and these numbers in the temperature slider are actually Kelvin numbers, so you can add or you can actually type in the value there and it will accordingly give you the number, the desired result. Whilst working with the white balance, you will notice that there is, whilst working with white balance, you will notice that there is a custom white balance which we have used just now. But if you would like to set it to any of these options like auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, or flash, you can choose it from this list here. If you choose auto, it will attempt to find the right color balance for the image. It may or may not be right, depending on what your scene looks like. So you could just change it accordingly and get it done. So I'm going to go back to custom that we used earlier because that's what the scene looked like. The next is the effects panel. So here you have texture and clarity. Texture is meant to add a little more detail to the finer areas in your image, like grass, clothes, feathers, etc. And if there are bigger areas like stones, rocks, etc., you may want to add clarity because that gives you sharpening for larger texture areas, and texture gives you sharpening for smaller texture areas. The dehaze slider is used if you have a haze in your image. For example, if you shot the image without a lens hood, it would be a little hazy, and you could use dehaze to, so when you bring up the dehaze slider, notice that it becomes a little more clearer. Okay, and the texture, so I'm going to add a little bit of texture. So if you notice now, if you notice this area, sorry, so if I go to, so I'm going to put that eyedropper off. That happened because the eyedropper was on, so I'm going to put it off. And I'm going to zoom into this part of the wall. Notice now as I move the texture slider, I'm getting a little more detail coming into not only the grass but also this area of the wall. So if I put this panel off, it would remove the effect and add on the effect back again. Okay. So I'm going to bring texture back to 0 and I'm going to bring it back to a little more above. And I'm going to push it back a little more above. So as you can see now, it's a little more clearer, a little more sharper. And if I still want to add sharpness to this, I could add clarity to it. So now notice that it's become really, really sharp. And if we do a before after and zoom in to, I'm using the spacebar and dragging, you can see that the detail that was not shown here is being shown here. Okay. So if you look at the wall and the steps, they look with a little more texture than they were otherwise. That is your effect slider. And finally, in the effect slider, you have a vignette option where you could darken the edges of your image by moving the vignette slider. Okay. So I have moved it purposely to the extreme. So now your focus is, your view is focused in the center of the image because of the darkening of the corners. Now notice that the vignette slider, okay, if there's arrows pointing left, you need to open it by clicking on it, and it will open and give you various options. So you have a midpoint option where you can reduce the midpoint or increase the midpoint according to what you need. You can add roundness or squareness to your image. So for example, you could do that. You can feather the image so that the vignette, so that if you want this look, you can use a 0 feather. If you want a nice soft look, you can use a 100 feather, or whatever you choose. And highlights is when you want to protect highlights. Notice that when I increase it fully, notice this part of the image. Okay, see, it has darkened the highlight. But if you don't want to darken the highlights, then you can increase this. Okay, So if we look at an image now, and if I want a clean, clear vignette, then I need to remove the feather altogether. And now this gives you an idea of what it looks like. If I make it full round, then this is what it looks like. So you could add artistic effects to your image. And because highlights is on, you can see if I put it on, it comes into the vignette. And if I put it off, then it goes away from the vignette. So that's the highlight slider in the vignette subsection. Okay, so if I double click on it, the vignette disappears, and so do the options. So that is your effects panel, and that's how you can effectively create a vignette around your image. There are other ways also, which we will see in masking. The next thing we are going to take a look at in Camera Raw is the curves sub panel, which is in the edit panel. So curves allow you to make tonal and color corrections, and you have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. The horizontal axis controls the input tones and the vertical axis controls the output tones. So you have two boxes there. If you open up the curve sub panel, you'll find a graph with a straight line going from the bottom to top diagonally, which represents various points in the tonal range, the lower one being the black point and the higher one being the white point. And notice that as you keep moving the mouse cursor over that line, you find different output and input values. Okay. So for example, if you wanted to just increase the brightness of this image, you would take it to the center because that's where the midpoints are, and you would pull it up. So this is one way to brighten up the image. And if you wanted to add contrast to it, you would move the black point to the right. When you do that, it increases the amount of black in the image. And moving the white point up there to the left increases the amount of white in the image. So thereby creating a sharper contrast. If you double click on any point, it will go back to normal. Okay. And normally people who are used to processing what you call an S-curve for contrast will do something like this. They will pull down this a little and they will pull up this point a little, and they would get an S-curve. So as you can see, this has added a lot of contrast to the image. Okay. So on top here, so I'm going to remove these points since we don't want these processing options. And notice here, this is the RGB value in the sense that all the red, green and blue channels will be adjusted through this single curve here. If you want to adjust, if you want to do color corrections, for example, this has got a reddish cast. So you can go to the individual channels, the red channel, the green channel, blue channel, and make changes. So I'm going to go to the red channel. Okay. Notice that the top part is red and the bottom part is the opposite color, that is cyan. So if I pull this curve towards the bottom, notice that it's adding cyan to the image. If I put it towards the top, it will add red to the image. Okay. So this is very dynamic. So notice earlier what we did was to add contrast. We moved the black point to the right and we moved the white point to the left. If we do the opposite, so for example, if we are on the red channel and we do the opposite, so we move the black point upwards and the white point downwards. Notice now we've got a bluish haze. Okay. And if I bring it down again, notice now, since only the top point, the white point has been pulled down, we are getting a cyanish haze. So if you want a hazy color, then you move it in the opposite direction. Okay. The same thing is with green. If I wanted to add a green haze, I could do it like this. Okay. And if I wanted a purple haze, I could do it like this. Similarly, if I move this black point up, it will add a greenish shades to it. So these are individual channels, and you can adjust your picture from the individual channels as well. And if you want to work with a particular area, now notice, keep in mind one thing, that these are global adjustments. So whatever we do applies to the entire image. You have here what we call a targeted adjustment tool. So if you click on it, it becomes black. That means it's selected. Now you can point to any area of your image, okay, and it will allow you to drag left or right in order to increase or decrease the tonal value of that particular color, and accordingly it will adjust the rest of the colors or the brightness in the image accordingly. So you can do that. You could point to a particular area and try to make it bigger. You can try to make it lighter, but notice now it has created a problem because you have multiple points, and you should always remember that the points above should not be uh, below the points to the left. So in this case, the top point is below the point to the left. So we need to correct that. So we need to bring the point to the left a little below, and notice now it has restored the image. So that is one thing you need to keep in mind when working with curves. Finally, I'm going to delete these curves by double clicking on them, and I'm going to put off the targeted adjustment tool. So you also have what you call a parametric curve. So the first option here is a parametric curve, where you will be able to work exclusively with highlights, darks, lights, and shadows. Okay. So if you notice here, you have 3 points which represents the highlights, the midpoint, the shadows, and the darks. So for example, if you drag this, you are actually making changes. You will, on this point, you will be making changes to the shadow areas. So notice the shadow area is getting brighter. And if you want to reduce the highlights, you can pull this down from the right hand side. Alternatively, you could also drag the sliders to make changes to your image according to your processing need. So at the moment, I'm not going to do anything with this, and notice that it's automatically adjusting the curve as per the sliders that you choose, or you can also dynamically adjust the curve yourself by moving these points. Okay. Notice you don't get individual points like you did in the earlier case. Right. So I'm going to just double click on all of these to get it back to normal. I'm not going to use any of the curves here. And so that's about curves, using curves in your image. Okay. So I'm going to make sure that we have everything back to normal. Okay. So we don't have any processing via curves on this image. The next thing is your color mixer. So in your color mixer, you have what you call a mixer, and you have a point control. So we're not going to go into point control right now. Let's go and take a look at mixer. So in your mixer, you have adjust HSL or adjust color. So if you want to adjust individual colors, it will give you a range of colors here, which you can use to manipulate or change the image. So for example, if I wanted to manipulate the reds in this image and decrease the saturation, then I could use this. Notice that the saturation now has almost gone, or I could increase it or decrease it accordingly. Notice this is only affecting the reds in the image and nothing else. Similarly, luminance, if you want to increase the brightness of that red color, you could do that here. If you wanted to change what red looks like, then you may want to use the hue slider. So if I bring it to the left, it will become more pink, and if I bring it to the right, it will become more yellow or orange. So you can adjust the hue of individual colors like this. If you don't want to work in this mode, you can go to all color mode, where you will get all sliders coming up like this. So it's the same thing, but only all the colors are listed one below the other for you to work with. So I'm going to double click on each one of this to reset it back to normal. HSL is another mode in which you can work with. So HSL stands for hue, saturation and luminance. So it's basically the same thing. The only difference is they are given you each of these attributes in separate panels. So hue separate, saturation separate, luminance separate. In the earlier case with color, notice when you choose the color, you get hue, saturation and luminance per color. So you could work at either mode. This is the older way to work with color in Camera Raw. So what you can do now here is, if you wanted to change the brightness, the luminance of any of the colors, you could play with these sliders. Okay, so for example, if I want to make the blues darker, notice the sky now getting darker because of that. Okay, and if you press the Alt button and drag like we saw earlier, it will show you the area being affected. Notice everything else is grayed out and only the affected area is in color. Okay, that is when you press the Option or the Alt button. So if you wanted to change the saturation of the sky, then you may want to go to the saturation panel and then increase the blues in that. So I'm purposely overdoing it here just to show you the difference that it makes. And finally, if you are not happy with the blue that is in the sky, then you can change it, the blue, either to a lighter blue or a purplish color. So you could adjust the shade of that in the color of that in the hue panel. So like this, you can use this color mixer to make changes to various colors in your image. But please note that whatever color you change will change throughout the image. So wherever, for example, wherever it finds red, it will change that in the image. So that is how you use this color mixer panel. And like the curves panel, you also have a targeted adjustment tool here. So when you click on it, it becomes black. And now you can go to any particular area. For example, if I wanted to make this grass lighter, I would make sure I was in the luminance panel first. Then I would point to the grass and go to the right. So notice now it is actually working on the blue and not the green. Okay, so sometimes the target adjustment will do what it wants. So as you can see here, it's only choosing blue. So I'm going to put it off. I'm going to choose luminance and I'm going to put it on again. And notice now it is only selecting blue for some reason. Maybe because there's a blue cast in it. Okay, you can also have a panel here at the bottom where you can change the saturation of elements within the image. Alright, so you could use the color mixer in order to make changes to the colors individually in your image. We are going to take a look at the point color option in the color mixer. So click on point color. Now this option allows you to select a particular color in the image and make changes to that particular color. Note that this is a global setting, so anywhere that particular color or shade is found in the image, it will be changed to whatever you set it. So to do that, you click on the sample point color icon here, and if you don't see this panel, make sure you have opened that slider, that panel, by clicking on that arrow there. Okay, similarly range, you can open it up by clicking on that arrow there. Now let's work with the sky. For example, if I click on the blue color in the sky, it immediately gives me a swatch there for that color and whatever we want to do, whatever changes we want to do with that color. So if you move upwards, it is saturation, or downwards is to desaturate. Left and right is to change the color of that particular blue that was chosen. And light and dark can be adjusted by moving this slider up and down. Okay, so you have hue, which is left to right, saturation, which is up down, and luminance, which is on the other slider there. So for example, if I want to make the sky purplish, I will bring it to this side. Okay, and notice that that particular area that I chose, that particular dark blue, will be affected. And this is the range. So if you want to increase the range of color, you can do so by doing that. So notice that it has spread out quite a bit on that. You can decrease the saturation if you're not happy with it, or increase it. So notice I'm doing it a lot just to show you how it's affecting the image. And the luminance as well, you can make it light or dark depending on how you want to manipulate the image. Now in the range itself, there is a hue range. So you want to go right from light blue to a darker blue. So basically adjusting this range and spreading it out kind of softens the effect on the edges. So it's like a feathering option. So notice you can barely make out now the difference in what we have added there. Okay. So this is your swatch which controls that. So for example, if we take the orange color, take the dropper again, and we select that color. Notice now we can change the color as we need it. We can make it darker, lighter, as we want it to be. We can change the saturation of those colors. We can change what the color looks like, etc. But notice that it will be applied throughout the image wherever that color is found. So like this, you can use these sliders to make changes to colors in your image without actually selecting them, by simply pointing to that color. So that's called point color. And it will create as many swatches as you want depending on what changes you make. And if you don't want a particular swatch, you can right click on it and press delete swatch, and it will disappear. So that's how you use the point color option in the color mixer. Color grading is used mainly in videos and stuff like that, but if you want to add color grading to your image, you have this option here. So you have the option where you can change it in three parts. One is midtones, shadows, and highlights. So for example, notice that the dot is in the center now for each of these circles. And if you drag this, for example, midtones, if you want the midtones to be a little warmer, you can bring it to up. Notice now everything has become a little warmer. If you want the shadows cooler, you can bring it towards the blue side. And if you want the highlights to be maybe another color, you could change it accordingly. So before after is, this is what it looks like after making these changes. Okay. So we'll go to single view, and these are the changes. Notice these points have all moved up. So if I double click on them, these circles, it will go back to normal. Similarly, you can work only with shadows or only with midtones or highlights. And finally, you can work with an overall measure that applies to the entire image, irrespective of whether it is shadows, highlights, or midtones. So if I want to just warm up this image a bit, I could just move it in like this and give it a nice warm glow. Or if I wanted to cool it down, I could just move it like this towards the blues and cool down the entire image. Okay. And the brightness for that luminance you can control here. Okay. Now, when you're working with individual sliders like midtones and all that, you have a balance option just below that. Okay, so for example, if I say I want all the shadows to be bluish, okay, now you have an option to work with the luminance for that particular color at the bottom. Okay? And you also have balance and blending. So for example, you can work with the slider to see how it blends throughout the image, and you also have a balance to show how much less or more you want to add of that into the entire picture. So shadows, if you want it even darker blue, you put it to the left, and if you want just a little bit of blue, you can balance it by putting it to the right. Alright, so I'm going to reset all this. I'm not going to add any color grading to this image. Okay, just double click and it will come back to normal. So you can use color grading like this to enhance the look of your picture. We have taken a look at the details panel. One point to note here in the details panel is that you also have a sharpening option here. So if you want to sharpen up your image, you could do it in this panel here. So for example, if I put the radius full and I put the sharpening full, notice that it becomes really very sharp. Okay? So you may want to then slightly lower the radius to see how it affects the sharpening of the image. You have a masking slider here. Now sharpening, as we discussed earlier, that these are all global parameters and they are going to apply to the entire image. And if you don't want it to be applied to the entire image, you just want it to be applied to certain areas of the image. So Control 0, Command 0 to see the entire picture. So when you want to control which areas are sharpened and which are not, like we don't want to sharpen the sky because it will bring out the noise, but we may want to sharpen the building areas. So when you drag on this masking slider, it will only mask certain areas. But if you want to see what areas are being masked, you press the Option or Alt button and then drag this. So notice now the black areas are not sharpened, but the white ones are. So I keep moving till I realize or till I get only the sharpening that I need on the areas that I want. So the white areas will be sharpened, not the black areas. Okay, so this much is enough. And now my picture looks much better. I could increase the detail and radius for this. Okay, so if I now take a look at my picture and zoom in, you will see that it looks better than the earlier one. So this was when I opened it last, and this is with the current. So I'm going to increase the sharpening so that it gets better. Right, so this is my image now. So that is your detail panel. We've taken a look at optics. Now in optics, you have a manual option also where you can go and make changes to the distortion in your image manually. Okay, so this is pin cushion, this is barrel, and you can adjust it. So in case you feel that the lines of your image are not straight or they're curved or whatever, and you want to adjust them, then you may want to come here and do that. Similarly, the vignetting that is caused by the lens, the darkening at the edges, can be adjusted here along with the midpoint option. And finally, we took a look at the defringe where we could manage to remove those fringing which was in the chromatic aberration earlier. Now lens blur is a new feature which has been given to the new versions of Camera Raw. And if you want to add effects to this, you can choose apply, and you have various bokeh types which are given below, so it takes a little while to apply. As you can see, this circle here is showing you how much of it has completed, and you can do that so that you can create effects. So for example, there are different models here. So if you click this one, then you can see that it is cat's eye, and if you bring it up, you see that just a small area in the middle is sharp, the rest are blurred. So if you take the last option here, then you will see that if you use bokeh boost, you'll see that only a certain area is sharp, whereas the others are blurred, and you can choose the blur amount that you want. So this is of course according to your taste and preference depending on what you want to do. So it's not really important. So I'm going to remove the application of that and get it back to original. Now this last option here, the last panel, is the calibration, and it's the process version of how it treats colors, or how it interprets colors. Now if you know that your camera deliberately is enhancing a color, you may want to come and make changes here, but it's not recommended unless you know what you're doing. So in my opinion, if you don't know what you're doing, leave this panel as it is. But for example, Nikon creates more red saturation. So if you find that you have shot a picture of a red flower and you feel that there's no detail in the red areas, that is because it is too saturated in the red area. So for example, if we take a look at this door, okay, and I could, if I knew what I was doing, even the pots here, I could reduce the saturation of the red. So by reducing the saturation of the red, notice now I have much more detail coming in both the door and the pots here. But remember that this will affect the entire picture. Notice this red also has gone down. So unless you know what you're doing, I do not recommend you changing anything in the calibration, because this is the calibration of how Adobe Camera RAW will interpret the raw information in your image. So with this, we have completed all the global adjustments in Camera RAW. Finally, on top, you have an auto mode. So by clicking on that, it will automatically process your picture according to what it thinks is the right processing. Now we have spent a lot of time making changes to this image, and all these changes we would like to save so that at any given time, if we make a mistake or we want to get them back, we can recall them. So for that we have something called a snapshot. So a snapshot keeps track of all the changes that you made in your image. So there is a small button here which says create snapshot, and the shortcut for that is Control or Command Shift and S. So when you click on that, it asks you to give it a name. So I'm going to call it process 1 color, and I'm going to choose OK. So notice it gets saved here. Now when I go back to the edit panel, I want to explore what auto does. So when I click auto, this is what it has done to my image, but it has also kept the settings which I have made earlier to some extent. Okay, so if you want to start from scratch, you may want to go to this three dots and say reset to default. So it will go back to what it was when we opened that up for the first time, the raw image. So we can choose auto now and see this is what it thinks that it should be. If I choose black and white, this is what it is. And if you choose HDR, which is high dynamic range processing without black and white, so this is what it looks like. So again, the processing that we did is much better than these options, but I'm just showing you this so that you know that you have these options to work with. So for example, suppose we want to make a black and white image. We could choose this, and now we could go and make changes, reduce the highlights, okay, maybe darken it a bit, increase the shadows. We could play with the temperature if we wanted. Notice that whatever you see now is in black and white. You could dehaze it to make it sharper. Notice there's a lot of noise, so I can go to detail and I can remove the luminance noise because there's nothing, no color in this right now. So we can smoothen it up a bit, and now it looks better. You could also use denoise, but that will take time, so I'm not doing it right now. And let's just say that this is a process that you like, and if you go to color grading now and go to global, you could add a cast. So for example, if you could make it a sepia image, or you could make it any other color that you want to add, a monochromatic image according to the color, the tone that you want to add to it. Okay, notice you can add only one tone here, but if you want to have more than one tone, then you'll have to go to this option here where you could add maybe a different color to each aspect of the image. So you could have a three-tone color like this. Okay, so I'm going to save this snapshot as three-tone, and I'm going to go back here and I'm going to reset all these to 0, and I'm going to go to global settings, and I'm going to add a little sepia tone to it, and I'm going to save this snapshot as a sepia tone. So now I have three processes which are saved on the same image, and I could generate three separate files from each of these. So for example, I could go to save and save in same location and click save. So now I've saved the sepia processing. I could go to three tone and I could save this again. Now I've saved the three tone processing. Finally, I can go to process one color and save it again. This time saving the processing that we did on the image. Now, when you have three options at the bottom here, open. So when you do that, or when you choose open as object or open, it will open up in Camera RAW. It will open up in Photoshop while saving all the data that you have, or all the settings that you have done in this image. If you click done, it will simply save all the settings that you have done. As we discussed earlier, it will create two files. It will create an XMP file and it will create a .acr file. Okay. Now we've not yet done masking, but we've added some filters. So it will create the ACR file for that, and all the other settings will be saved in the XMP file. That is when you click done. We have already outputted the file just now into a JPEG file by clicking the save button here on top. Now, if you click cancel, then whatever you have done right now will not be saved. So not a wise option, but if you want to restart from scratch, then you may want to choose cancel. So at this point of time, I'm not going to open it up in Photoshop. I'm simply going to click done. Now, when you take a look here, you will find that we have the old copy, we have the new JPEG copy, that is the color 1 profile. Then we have a three-tone profile, and we have the black and white version, which have been saved in JPEG format. Notice my NEF file here. Okay, this is my NEF file, and on the top of that you have this icon showing the settings. It's showing you that settings have been applied to the original RAW file. So you're seeing the processed RAW file. That means the RAW file along with the settings. Okay, so now I've opened up the file manager, and you can see now that there is an XMP file and there's a .acr file which have been created along with the same name of the raw file. If you open up the XMP file, you'll see that it's got a whole lot of settings which have been saved. You may not make sense of all this, but these are all the settings. So by mistake, if you, I'm going to just copy this name, and if by mistake you change this name, I'm going to call it Z. Now, when you go to open up your raw file, this is what your raw file looks like. Notice all the processing has gone and it has come back to normal. So when you open up this in Camera RAW, it will go back to what the original setting was, because all the other settings have been deleted. So I'm going to go back to my file manager and I'm going to restore the name of this XMP file back to the name of the photo. So now you will notice when you go back to Camera RAW, we have restored all the settings and we've got back the original processing of our RAW file. So please be careful when you are deleting files. Do not delete the XMP files and the ACR files because they contain processing information for that particular RAW file. With this, we complete the global processing for RAW files in Camera RAW. So we have taken a look at how to globally process the image. I'm going to open up the image again. So I'll say open in Camera RAW, but that was in Bridge. Remember that we have saved snapshots of the image, the processing for the image. So if we click on those snapshots, it would bring back the processing that was involved there. So I can go back to any one of these processes and proceed from there. So for example, let's go back to process 1 color. Notice that it has been loaded automatically, and now I can proceed to make any changes I want with this image. We are now going to take a look at some options in the remove panel. So you can use this panel to remove any distractions, any unwanted area that you don't want, or anything that you don't want in the image. Now there are different modes here. So the first one is remove, the second one is heal, and the third one is clone. In earlier versions of Camera Raw, you did not have the remove option. This is relatively new to the new versions of Adobe Camera RAW. So for example, if you did not want this lampstand here, all you would do is you would typically go to that particular option there and paint over the area with your mouse that you don't want, and it will attempt to remove it from there. So as you can see, it has removed the thing pretty well, but the lamppost pretty well, but notice that is left back a halo which you can deal with similarly. Now if you want to get back that area, you simply press Ctrl or Command Z and you can get back the area. Okay, now there is also a detect objects option which will take time. So if you, for example, click on it, it will try to detect objects when that you select. So for example, if I take this, it will attempt to detect the lamppost as an object. So notice it has taken that area, and then you can select, you can subtract or add to that area. So for example, if I click subtract, I could paint out the area that I don't need to work on. So this is also possible, and I can leave just that and then choose remove. Notice it's cleanly gone now. And if you want to use generative AI, for example, you agree to that, and let's go back, Command Z, okay, and bring it back here. This time we'll use generative AI and ask it to remove this, and we will mark this area, and it will then allow us to add or subtract to that. Okay, and so it will try to use generative AI now to cover that area. So we'll choose remove. Okay. So it has left back something. So this is what generative AI will do. It may leave back something, or it may not remove it completely. However, each photo is different, so you may want to play around with the settings and see what works best. Okay, so I'd use the undo button here on top to reset everything. So that was using the remove tool. You can also use heal. Okay, and the size of the brush can be adjusted here. Okay, with this slider. Notice If you want to use shortcuts to increase or decrease the size of the brush on the go, then you have the left bracket and the right bracket keys. So if you press the left bracket key, it will make the brush size smaller, and if you use the right bracket key, it will make the brush size bigger. So depending on the area that you want to paint or work with, you can accordingly adjust the size of the brush. So now in the healing part, I'm going to just paint this area that I want to remove. Okay, and Camera Raw will try to remove it for me. Now you have an option right at the bottom which says show overlay. So if you put that option on, it will show you what it has removed and what it has used to replace that area. Okay, so for example, I can change the position of that area like this to make it match better. Okay, or I could take it at the side here. Okay, so you need to find a spot where it will be able to blend in well with whatever your original image is. So let's say we use this part. Right, so if you put that show overlay button off, then this is what it's going to look like using the healing option. However, there is some extra part here which is not desirable. So the next thing that you may want to use is any option from here, like remove, clone, heal, which is the selected method. So we just used heal, and the healing also you can change the opacity. Like for example, you can reduce or increase the opacity of how much you want to show of the healed area. And you can also change the feathering of the healed area so that you may want to make it look a little bit more clearer. Finally, you have the clone option. Okay, so I'm going to reset this, get it back, and the clone option, which is similar to healing. So here, what happens here is it'll take an exact copy of whatever you ask it to. So for example, this is the area I want to work with. So I'm going to paint over this lampstand here, and notice it has taken it from somewhere, and if we want to see that, we have to use the show overlay button. So notice it has taken it from the side. Okay, so we could adjust that a bit and see how it could work with the copy. Okay, so we can decide where we want the copy to be taken from. Okay, so after having done this, I can put show overlay off, and this is what it looks like. Notice it doesn't look very good, so if I feather it a bit, it's going to look something like that. And that's how you use clone for. So basically it just makes a copy of another area and dumps it there. In the case of healing, it makes a copy of another area, but it also tries to blend that area well, as we saw earlier. So I'm going to refresh this, and we don't want any of those changes. So if you desire to remove anything from the image or any stain or something like that, you can use this. So notice those patches went away there, and one more here. So you can clean up the image. So you have a crack in the road here. So if you want to adjust that, you can maybe make the brush size a little smaller and paint over that area like so, and it's gone. Okay, so this is the remove panel, which you can use to remove things. Now in the new versions, you also have distraction removal. So there are reflections, remove reflections. So we don't have any reflections right now here. So we're going to avoid that. And you can also remove people. Again, there are no people here. So we can leave that for the moment. So when working with images which have clear backgrounds, like the sky or studio backgrounds which are clear, sometimes dirt on the lens or the sensor may show up in these areas, and it may be hard to spot. So in the remove panel, you have a feature called visualize spots. So when you click on that option there, it will show you something like this, and you can move that slider to show more or less of the data. So I'm taking a look at the sky right now, and I'm just seeing one spot maybe on the top there. So in order to remove it, all you need to do is choose any one of the remove options, heal or remove or clone. I'm choosing remove, and you can make the brush big enough so that you can see that spot, so that you can remove that spot. So it's very clear now. As I move the slider, there's one here. So I just click on it, and Photoshop will remove that spot. Similarly, if there are other spots you feel that should not be there or not part of the image, then you can simply remove it. So it's waiting for me to click on this remove button here. Alternatively, if you do not want to use the remove option, you can also use the healing option. So I'm going to choose heal, and I'm going to make the brush small enough to click on the other dot there and one more dot there. Okay, so I've clicked on two dots here. If you can't see it, you can use the show overlay option, which is at the bottom here, and you can see that there are these band-aid like icons which show the removal of data from those points. Okay? You can put visualize spots off, and now you can put show overlay off, and now there are no spots in the sky. So this is a very useful option to remove lens dirt and sensor dirt which may appear in the images. So now we go to masking. Okay. So what is masking? Masking is nothing but identifying an area that you want to work with. So far we have been working with the entire picture. So whatever settings we applied to the entire picture. Now we want to apply certain settings only to parts of the image. Okay. So when you click on this masking icon, you'll get the masking panel. There you have some shortcuts like create new mask for subject, sky, background, select objects, select brush, linear gradients, and you have radial gradients, and you can also select a range. So you can use a color range, or you can use a luminance range. The luminance range is nothing but a range of dark to bright. Now in HIEF images, you can also use depth, but since this is just a normal raw file, it does not have a depth setting. Therefore, it is grayed out here. So working with masking. So when you work with masking, like for example, you may want to select the entire sky. Now initially, before these options were available in the older versions of Camera Raw, you would have to take a brush, okay, and you can set the size, the feather. The feather is how sharp the edge is. So the greater the feather amount, the more soft the brush will be, and the lesser the feather amount, the more hard the brush will be. Flow refers to how much of the painting effect will happen. Okay. For example, if you want to apply some brightness to a particular area, so for example, I'm going to increase the exposure by a certain amount, and by say one and a half stops, so to say, and I want to paint in areas of the sky, okay, and I want the full strength of what I've put exposure 135 to apply. Then I put flow as 100%, and feather you can keep it at 80 or something like that. And density is again how much of the effect you want to apply. So we'll keep it at 100%. So now when I paint, notice that I get one effect. Whether I paint over and over it, it's giving me the same result. But if I use a low flow, like 10, 20 or something like that, now notice that when I paint once, it gives me a very limited effect. I keep painting over it. Gradually, it will keep adding that 14% and bring up the area. So this is nice when you want to add very smooth transitions of effects. Keep the flow low and add your effect. So I'm going to undo these changes on the brush. So remember that whenever you start using a mask, it creates a panel for you, a small panel here or a layer which has your masking options. So you mask with the brush, so we have it here, and in case you don't need it anymore, you can right click on those three dots and you can say delete mask 1. So that effect will go. So in earlier days, for example, whenever you're using a brush, we've looked at the other options of size, feather, flow and density. So for example, if I paint over this edge now, and I'm going to use a full flow so you can see the effect. Notice that when I am painting over this edge, it is also selecting the other elements like the tree, the church, the other part of the land and so on. So I have managed now to select my sky completely, but there are some overlap areas. So if you put this option called show overlay on here, notice there are areas other than the sky that have been selected. Now if you don't want this to happen, okay, so I'm going to undo. I'm going to choose the brush again, but this time I'm going to use auto mask. So with auto mask, it will try to find edges and avoid them whilst painting. So for example, if I put this option show overlay on, so it will show me in red color because that's the color that is chosen here. If you want another color, you can choose whichever color you want. Okay, so I'm going to choose green, and you can choose the opacity, keep it a little above 50, and you want to show the affected areas. Okay, click OK. So now when I start painting on the sky, okay, it will try to avoid other places. Okay, so a little better but not great. So I'm going to try again. So I'm going to undo this. Alright, and we're going to paint with a smaller brush. So let's take the brush. Auto mask is on, and we're going to paint with a smaller brush. So notice now I'm trying to avoid the edges, and we don't have so much of an overlap like we did earlier without the auto mask option. So once you're done with the edges, you can put that off, and now you can paint over the area that you want. Now this is a long process. This is the way we used to do things earlier, but now with the new versions, we have an option where we can select the sky, and it's much better. So I'm going to delete this mask. We don't need it. And instead I'm going to click on this select sky option here. So when you do that, notice it has gone ahead and selected the sky for you, what it thinks is the sky, and it's good enough. Now, if you feel that there are some areas which you don't want and you need to knock it off, you can click subtract, use the brush, and paint over those areas which you feel are not required in the sky selection. Okay, once you're done, this mask is ready. Now when you click on this mask 1, you will get options or settings that you can use to manipulate only that area. So for example, if I bring in the blacks, increase the whites, I can increase the contrast there, and I can reduce the overall exposure in the sky. So as you can see, I can make it a little warmer, can add a little purple to it, and going down I can add texture, I can add clarity, I can dehaze it a bit, and I can add a little more blacks on top here and add a little bit of exposure. So as you can see now, it is only manipulating the area that is shown in green or the overlay. So I can put that off so you can see what it looks like after the processing has been applied to it. If I want to increase the saturation, I can do that. Okay, I have over processed this part just to show you what can be done to just part of the image. And if I do a before after, you see it has okay. So you can zoom up. It's not letting me do that for some reason. There we are. Notice the difference in the sky with the processing. Alright, so CE, get back to single view. So when we go back to the masking panel, we will see that there is one mask. Okay, if you want to rename that, you can double click on the word mask 1 and type in, for example, sky. So we know that that mask pertains to the sky. Now you have various options when dealing with masks. So let's say I want to select everything except the sky. So since we already have a selection of the sky, we can choose the sky, and then you can click on these three dots and say duplicate and invert mask. So duplicate will make another copy of this, which will give us the sky, and invert mask will give us everything except the sky. So duplicate and invert mask. So notice in green here, you will see the areas that have been selected are the sky, except the sky, everything else. There's a mistake here. There's a brush stroke which has been applied. So I'll click subtract, brush, and I'm going to paint it out from any other extra area which you feel is not required in that area. You can simply remove it. Okay. I'm doing it quickly to save time, but you can take your time and accordingly adjust the mask. So once that's done, now I can choose sky inverted. Okay. And when you click on that, you'll get options for that area. So now I'm going to warm it up a bit, and we are going to make it a little more saturated. You can add light or whatever you want to it. So I'm going to keep it that way. And you have various options like texture, clarity, etc. So you can use it accordingly. Right. So we have got two masks now, the sky mask and the sky inverted mask. So like this, you can create various kinds of masks in Camera Raw, depending on what you want to do. Let's say now we want to have a little focus of light on the, the church itself, this structure which looks like a church. So I'm going to use a radial gradient. A radial gradient is when you want to show something in a circular format and you want to process some area which is in an elliptical or circular format. So you simply draw and cover the area that you want to affect. You can reduce and change the size by dragging on these dots at the side. And once you're done with that, you have various options here also, like feathering. Okay, so for example, if I say show overlay, then it will show you that area that is being covered, and the feather amount, if I reduce it, you'll see that it becomes very sharp. So I'm going to increase it to max. So there's a very gradual shading there. And on this new mask, okay, I'm going to add some exposure. Going to make it a little bright. Okay, so I'm going to put show overlay off so that you can see exactly what is happening. So this is what we are doing with this area. So we are adding a little focus here to this church by adding some light to it. Now remember that whenever you add light to an area, you may want to add a little bit more of saturation so that it compensates for that light. Right. So if we go to the edit panel now and do a before after, you see our image has improved quite a lot. As you can see, uh, it's much better than the original. So I'm going to go back to single view and let's do one more mask. So let's go to masking and choose a linear gradient. So linear gradient will allow you to go from left to right, top to bottom, and vice versa. So for example, if I want to slightly brighten up the area from the bottom up, I will draw a line like this. Okay, and I can choose how much of exposure I want to add there, what kind of brightness I want to add, and I can adjust how it affects the area with this circle here, which allows you to do that. And this is the center part of the image that you can use to, and this is the center part of the gradient that you can use to move it around, and you can turn it around with the top part here. So if you want it at a diagonal angle, you can change it like this. And once done, now you have a linear gradient where we are applying it only to the foreground of this image. So right now it got inverted. Okay, so you can turn it around and you can see how it looks. Alright, so that's how you use a linear gradient. So there is also color range. So for example, if you click on this and you click on the grass here, okay. So, and if you say show overlay, and since the grass is green, we will change the overlay to a red color. Notice it has found green in many places and we don't want that. So there is a range option here where you can refine the range. Okay. So if I reduce it, notice that it now is going back to only the grass area. Okay. And the trees which have that particular area as green. So now only these areas which are marked in red will be affected. So I'll just bring up the highlights on these areas so that the grass can be seen a little more clearly. So when we do a before after, okay, and we put the show overlay off, you see there's a big difference now in the total image by using masks. Alright, let's go back to single view and let's go back to the masking panel. So we have a lot of masks here. I'll call this grass. Alright. So of course they're looking a little weird, but we are just learning how to apply these various options. Okay. And finally you have luminance. Luminance pertains to an area of dark or bright. Luminance pertains to an area of brightness. So same as in color range, you just go and click on a particular range Okay, and here it's choosing linear gradient, but we don't want linear gradient. So let's delete this mask and let's go back here and choose luminance range. And here we simply go and click on the area that we want. So it has put a point there, and now we can choose by dragging this which areas are affected. Okay, so we'll keep it there, and if you say show luminance mask, and it will show you in red the areas that are being affected. So you can drag on these areas, 1, 2, they are separate. Okay, this is the feathering that you see here. Now once this area has been marked, you can now adjust only those areas by dragging your adjustment sliders so that you can get the effect that you want. So I'm going to put show luminance map off, and you can play around now with these settings. So it will apply to those areas of luminance that have been selected with this mask. Okay. So we have seen how to use these options. Okay. Now there is also a select object. So if I choose select object and I paint over this area, the top of the church, so it will try to find an object there and make a selection of that. So if we don't see what is happening, you can click the show overlay button, and notice now it has neatly found the top of that church. If you try it in earlier versions of Adobe Camera RAW, you would spend a lot of time painting with a fine brush all that area. And now they made it simpler by choosing select object. So all you need to do is, for example, I'll do it again, select objects, and I'm going to select these trees. Okay, so notice it has marked those tree areas, and now we can play around with them. Okay, all right, so by using masking we can process certain areas of the image whilst ignoring the other ones. So all the mask operations are available on these three dots here. So if you want to take everything except the trees which are on this mask 5, we can choose invert mask. So what will happen is it will leave the trees alone and it will select everything else. Okay. Then you have intersect with mask. Now this is a little more complicated. As you gain proficiency, you can look out for another video on my channel which deals with only masking and advanced masking in Adobe Camera RAW. You can duplicate a mask, you can hide a mask and delete a mask, and you can reset the mask for all adjustments. Okay. So all these masks again will be stored in the .acr file that we discussed earlier. If you don't want a mask to be applied but you still want to keep it, then you put the visibility button off. So if I don't want this mask but I still want to keep it, I can just put it off and that area will not be affected. Okay. So you can put off the masks as you need. Okay. And if you want to put everything off, you can use the visibility icon on top, so everything goes off. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just put the sky one on and the other one as well. Okay. So this image now has been done. Of course, we have overprocessed the image just to learn the various aspects of Camera RAW. We've taken a look at snapshots, and now you also have presets. So what is the preset? Preset is nothing but is like a snapshot, but it is saved separately in the sense that you can create a library of presets. For example, if you want to work with only uh, the sky, for example, in pictures, and you want to apply a standard kind of formula to the sky. So what you can do is, I'm going to come here and I'm going to delete all these masks because we don't need them right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select sky, and let's say we'll reduce the exposure, we will add some blacks to it, we'll add some blue to it, we'll increase the exposure a little, we will add some texture, we'll add some clarity, we'll add some dehaze to it. And let's say these are the settings I want to keep for any sky that I want to use it with. So I am going to go to presets, okay, and under presets I can say create preset, okay, and in that I can choose what I want. So for example, in masking, okay, I'll open it and I can say use mask 1, okay. So when we use that, basically it is going to select the sky and it's going to apply those changes we made with it. And besides that, we don't want anything else. I'm going to put all these other options off. We don't want to save anything else except these things, the mask, the sky mask settings. And I'm going to call it process sky. Okay, and I'm going to save it in the group called user presets. Click OK. So now under user presets, you will have process sky. And if you want to make it a favorite, you can click on the star button, then it becomes a favorite. Okay. So now under presets, because I clicked that, it has removed all the other settings I used earlier. Okay. So I'm going to go back here. All right. And I'm going to click done. Okay, so I'm going to open up another image here in Camera RAW, and I would like to use that preset for the sky. So I'm going to go to presets, I'm going to go to user presets, and I'm going to click process sky. Notice it has processed the sky. If we go back to masking, you will see that it has created a mask for that sky in that image, and whatever processing options we had applied earlier, all these texture, clarity, dehaze, etc. have been applied to this sky. Okay. So you can create presets like this to work on different areas. Okay. Now this worked with this image because it has used the automatic version of selecting the sky irrespective of what picture has been loaded. So like this, you can create your own presets. You can make a library. There are, as you can see, a lot of presets already available to you, which you can apply to an image. So for example, if I choose season summer, okay, and you have summer 1, summer 2, etc. These are all presets which are applying various settings to your image automatically. So you can have cinematic styles also here. Okay. So a lot of styles here. So if you want to save time, You can use these ready-made styles, and when you apply a style, so for example subject landscape, landscape 1 or landscape 2 or landscape 3. Now once you have applied this, you can go back there and check what has been done in each panel. Notice the vibrance has gone up, saturation has been reduced. So like this you can also learn what is available in each of those presets, and you can learn some processing options from there. Look, it has created its own curve, color mixer, it has changed something, and so on and so forth. So again, these are all presets which have been already given to you, but as I showed you, you can also create your own presets by saving them. Alright, so that was about presets. Okay. Now very often when you're working with an image, I'm going to close this image, click done. I'm going to open up the camera raw image again, the raw image again. So I'm going to open up the raw image again. So here, let's say we already have a lot of these snapshots saved. So I'm going to go ahead and say reset to default. So nothing happens to our snapshots. We can always go back to that processing. So I've reset it to default. Now remember that for all images, you may want to do something like optics. Go to profile, and you may want to put both these options on for all images. Okay, and for all images you may want to maybe reduce the highlights and shadows. So let's say these are the settings you want to apply to all images. So what you can do is you can click on these three dots and say save settings. Okay, select everything because we want to keep whatever we have done right now, and we say save. So we'll call it all images. That means we want to apply this to all images. Whenever we open them up, it has to be done manually, and save it. So we save that. It's called all images. So when you go to the presets area here, under user presets, you'll find all images. So I'm going to mark it as favorite. Okay, and notice now that it has been applied to this particular image. All right. So now I'm going to press, we have saved that as a preset. Okay, and I'm going to press cancel because I don't want to affect the picture. I'm going to again open up this in Camera Raw, and let's assume that it was not processed. So now I want to, let's say this is a new file I've got and I want to apply those processes automatically. So I'll go there to the three dots, apply favorite preset, and here I can choose all images. So notice now it has automatically gone and put the tick marks here, and it has also gone and reduced the highlights and and increased the shadows. So like this, you can create your own presets and use them across images to save time. So this completes an overview of Adobe Camera RAW. You can use this to start processing your images so that you get all your fundamentals right using for processing with Camera RAW. Okay. And once you're done making your process, now we have already saved our process here, so we are going to go here. And once you're done with your process, you can go to here on top, Control S, or click on that, and it will allow you to save your file to another format if you want. So for example, if I wanted a TIFF file, I will use .tiff, and I would say save it in the same location. So it would give the same file name, but the extension would be TIF. And you can choose here what bit depth and you want. So I'm going to choose 8 bits only and click save. Okay, and once it saves it, you can click done. So notice now I will get another file by the name of .tif, TIF. Yeah. Okay. So this is my processed file now. This is how you can process your images in Camera Raw. Okay. So what we just saw are what we call local adjustments. What we saw before were global adjustments. Global adjustments apply to the entire picture, whereas local adjustments apply only to parts of the image. Now let's take a look at batch processing images. I'm going to take 3 images which were shot at the same time, and in Bridge I'm going to select all 3 of them. Okay, and right click and choose Open in Camera RAW. And if you are using the file manager, you could go to that particular folder and look out for those files. So these are the files 1, 2 and 3. So we can say open with Photoshop, and notice from file manager we are not able to get all 3 files together. It's only opening the last file we clicked. So for batch processing, it is advisable to open up with Bridge. So in Bridge, simply select the 3 files that you want to work with. Okay, and right click and choose Open in Camera RAW. Notice they come up in the film strip. Okay, I'm going to shift the position of the film strip to horizontal, and you have all the 3 images here lined up for you at the bottom. So since they were shot at the same time, the same place, I would select all the images. So to do that, say you right click on any one of the image and say select all, or you press Ctrl A. So notice all 3 images are selected. Now whatever settings you apply, so for example we'll apply a favorite preset, all images. So it will go to optics and do all that for us, and also in the light panel it will do the highlights and shadows. Now I'm going to reduce the exposure on all that so that it looks even across all. Okay, and I'm also going to do a luminance adjustment for the noise. Okay, there's not much noise here, but I'm just showing you how to use it in a group mode. Okay, and so once you have now made the changes you want for all, now you can start working with them individually. So for example, I would go in here and select that image and then maybe just crop part of it. Okay, it's not clear, so I'm going to go to effects. I'm going to add texture, clarity, dehaze it a bit, and add a little more light to it. Now in order to make it stand out, what I can do is I can go to masking and choose a radial mask. Can select the area. Okay, notice that it has applied blacks to it. I don't want it to apply blacks to it, and I want to brighten it up. Okay, and I want to make it a little clarity, texture and blacks to it. So I want to make it stand out like this. At the same time, the area outside this selection should be darker. Now I can't do it inside and outside at the same time. Right now I applied the settings to the inside of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say duplicate and invert mask. So it will take everything except those inside area. I'm going to reduce the feathering. so that as you can see, it will take only the outside area, and to that outside area I am going to reduce the light on that. So I can play with the feathering so that you don't know where it starts and where it stops. And now if we do a compare, you see you have a better image. You can add some light overall to it. So where those apples were not standing out earlier, now they are. Okay. So we process that image. We'll go to single view on this image and we'll do the same thing. Okay. So I'm going to go to masking. I'm going to add a radial gradient. I'm going to select this area and I'm going to add a little brightness to it. Okay. And a little texture, clarity, and dehaze. Let it look a little better. Okay. And I'm going to take a new mask. Okay. And again a radial gradient, but this is a new mask. I'm going to mask this area a little bigger, but now I want to use everything outside this area I've chosen. So there is a button here on top on the radial mask. Okay, in this panel there is this option here called invert the selected area. So you can either choose this button or you can say invert mask here. Shortcut is Alt X. So if you show overlay, you'll see that it has taken everything outside of that. Okay. So you can reduce the light on that. And as you can see now, our image stands out much better than what it was earlier. If you want, you can crop this image. And let's say it's done. Finally, we do the same thing here. We just crop this image. Okay. And if you find the red saturation too much, then you can go to color mixer, saturation, reduce the saturation on the red. So now you can see perfect detail and it looks a lot better. So overall this image will just add texture, clarity, dehaze, make it look a little sharper. Okay. And overall we'll add some light to this image. So let's say this is done, and if you don't want this side part, this bud showing on the side, you can go to the remove panel, go to the remove tool, make your brush bigger with the right bracket key and mark over that area, and Camera RAW will remove it for you. Okay, so click the remove button and that's it. Okay, there's a small dot here, we can remove that as well. Okay, it has gone. Now I finish processing all these images and I want to save all of them at one shot. So again I right click on the image, select all. Then you have an option here called save, or you can go up here and choose the convert and save. We can say we want JPEG files, sRGB, same location, save. So it says 3 remaining, 2 remaining, 1 remaining. So it has saved all the 3 files into JPEG. And we click done to save these changes. So notice now it has created 3 more files for us in this same folder. Okay. And they are called JPEG. So this is the original, this is the JPEG. So you have 3 JPEG files, 1, 2 and 3. So with that we conclude processing images with Camera RAW. I wish you all the best in your processing.